We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos in Chelik Chof Vav, and this is the third Sicha for the Parsha of Terumah. The Rebbe discusses here a technical thing. We know that in the menorah, talking about the construction of the menorah, there were prachim on the both on the body of the menorah. That's the stem, the middle one, and also on the six branches that branched out from the side. So there were prachim, there were flowers, look like designed like flowers. There were gevim, they were like designed like cups. The Rebbe explains from the Rambam the cups were upside down, like the top uh, on the bottom and the bottom on the top. And also the kaftorim, these buttons, all designs in the menorah. But the pasuk says mishukodim. Mishukodim comes from the language of shkedim, almonds. The Rambam, the Rebbe will bring down later on the Sikha, translates that mishukodim, it was made in a certain manner which is known to the craftspeople in a way of mishukodim. It's not exactly clear over there how to translate that, but nevertheless, the Torah says mishukodim. Now, the Rambam writes that all these, the kaftorim and the prachim and the uh, gevim, they're all mishukodim. They're made in the way of mishukodim. Everything. And the issue that the Rebbe is addressing, that the Mefarshim ask, number one, the question in the Gemara, which seems to be the basis of the Rambam, is only on the middle stem, not on the branches. As far as the branches are concerned, the pasuk seems to clearly say that only the gevim, the cups, were made mishukodim, but the kaftoreho, pracheho, the buttons and the flowers, the kaftorim and the prachim, they were not made mishukodim. So it seems from the pasuk. The question from the Gemara is the middle stem. Over there, it is not so clear. We'll see all this in the Sikha. From the Gemara, it's not so clear in the Pasuk whether the Meshukodim applies to the Gavim or it also applies to the Kaftorim or the Parachim or only to the Kaftorim or Parachim. And therefore, we can do them both. But the Rebbe's issue is that all the Mefarshim ask, why would all of the kaftorim and the prochim on the branches be mishukodim? Over there, there's not a question. Doesn't seem like a question. And the Rebbe brings down also all the mefarshim. But the Rebbe's bottom line is the Rebbe would say that the idea that everything is made mishukodim is not even a question. It has nothing to do with the question that we have in the pasuk. The pasuk question is only how to to translate the pasuk. The Rebbe says it's inconceivable that there should develop a question how the menorah is made, and that there can be a doubt, and how would the Torah write something which is not clear. There is no question. The Rebbe learns different than all the Mefarshim, than the Kesef Mishnah, and the Rikurkus, than the Mabi, the Mishnah Lamelech. The Rebbe learns very balabatish, comes up with a tremendous novel chiddush in this simple meaning that when the Torah says that it's Mishukodim, everything was done Mishukodim because there could not be a machlokes. That was the way that the menorah looked like, and it would not be written in a way of a doubt. The only question is the Torah allowed for a question how to interpret the pasuk, but not how they were made. The bottom line is if there was a betterment, more beautiful way to make the menorah as mishukodim, as it seems that you should make it in that way, that would be a mitzvah for everything. Zekeli van vehu, everything has to be done in the most beautiful way. So that's not even a question. The Rambam doesn't need the Gemara's question to prove his point. This is something obvious that this is the way it was made. And it was made because if there is a better way of making something, then it's part of Zekeli van vehu. The only issue is how to tie the puzzle. We'll say, I know I'm throwing a lot right in the beginning, but we'll go step by step now and we'll see what the Rebbe says. Aleph. Wegen der Zuras HaMenorah steht in der Heintiker Sedre. With regards to the shape of the menorah, it states in today's Sedre, in the portion of Terumah where it talks about the construction of the menorah and the other kelim, some of the other kelim. So it says like this: Shloisha Geviim Meshukodim. There were three cups, three Geviim that were made Meshukodim. The Koneho Efchad. On each branch, there were 6 branches. Each branch, Koneho Echad, had 3 Geviim Meshukodim. And then it says further in the pasuk, there was also a kafter vaferach. There was a button and there was a flower. Those were designs within the each of the branches of the menorah came l'sheishes hakonim. So it was done for all the 6 branches. So now first the pasuk discusses how the branches were. That there were 3 cups that were made in a way of mishukodim, each branch, and then the pasuk says that there were also buttons and there was also flowers, and likewise, same thing was done for all 6 branches. Then the Torah goes on to say, what about the menorah itself? That's the stem, the middle of the menorah, ube menorah, and in the menorah, which is referring to the gufa shel menorah, the body of the menorah, not the branches, but the body, koneh ha'emtzoi, that middle branch. Arbo givim. So over there were 4 givim, mishukodim. They were also made in a way of mishukodim. Kaptereo upracheho. Her buttons and the flowers. Over here, reading the verse, as we'll see in the Gemara, there is a possibility to interpret it in 2 ways. Either we can say, read it, Arbo Gvim Mishukodim. So then the Mishukodim refers to the Gvim. Again, we're talking about the branch, the middle part of the menorah, the Konahem Tzoi. So either we can translate it as 4 cups Mishukodim, and then there was Kaftereo Prachaho, or we can translate it Arbo Gvim Mishukodim Kaftereo Prachaho, which would mean that the Kaftorim and the Prachim were Mishukodim, but not the Gvim. The word Mishukodim can go to the top or can go to the bottom, as we'll see from the Gemara. But this whole possibility is only in the middle one, because over there it says Gvim Mishukodim, and you can either say Gvim Mishukodim, or you can read Mishukodim Kaftereo Prachel. With regards to the Kanim, the branches of the menorah, over there it says very clearly Arbo Gvim Mishukodim, and then the pasuk says on each branch. Then it says Kafteru Ferach. As we'll see, the Rebbe will articulate all this as we go along. So it almost seems clearly that as far as the branches are concerned, the only thing that needed to be made in the way of Mishukodim were the Givim, as the pasuk says, Arbo Gvim Mishukodim. And then there was also Kaften Prachel. There was no need to make them Mishukodim. In the second pasuk, by the branches, there is 2 possibilities. Either it goes Arbo Gvim Mishukodim, So then that means the Gevim need to be, or it should go Meshukodim Kaftarel Procha. Okay. Surprising thing, the Rambam writes that all of the buttons and all of the flowers and all of the cups on the entire menorah, on the branches and on the body of the menorah, they were all made Meshukodim. And the question is, what's the source for the Rambam? Maybe the middle one we understand. There's two possibilities, so we need them both. But in the branches, doesn't seem to be a question. In Hilchos Beis Abechira, in the laws of Beis Abechira, noch dem, with the Rambam rechnet is the mispor from the Gevim Kaftorim Uprachim. After the Rambam enumerates the numbers, so how many cups there were combined between the branches and the stem of the menorah, and how many buttons there were, the kaftoidim there were between the stem and the branches of the menorah, and how many flowers there were designed in the goof of the menorah and the branch of the menorah. Sai, both from the knei menorah, from the stem of the menorah, and sai from the sheishus hakonim, and also the 6 branches. Firterois, the Rambam concludes, the hakoil, all of the above, mishukodim, they were all made mishukodim. Kimoy shkedim basiyosam, they were made like shkedim when they made them. So, the question that the Meforshim asked, so the Kesef Mishnah brings down, if them was the Rambam zokt, v'hakoil mishukodim, the Rambam says that everything was made, all of the above, the kaftoidim, the prachim of everything were made mishukodim. As alle givim kaftoidim u'prachim, that all these cups, buttons, and flowers in their menorah and the menorah, zayne givim mishukodim, they're all made in a way mishukodim. Bring der Kesef Mishnah from the Harikurkus, the Mishnah brings down from the Rikurkus. Kosav Kein Rabbeinu. Why did the Rambam write this? That they were all made like that. So he says like this. Midamrinon the Perek Haitziuloi. The Perek Haitziuloi in Yoima, the Gemara Yoima, the Gemara says there that there are 5 sukkim Midamrinon Perek Haitziuloi. Over there, say, "Hey mikrois elam hechra." There are 5 verses that have no conclusive way to read them, and one of them is mishukodim. This is also one of the verses that has no deciding factors, no one way. It says over there the pasuk is mishukodim. It says, the Pasuk says in the menorah there were 4 cups, mishukodim, that were made like shkedim, kaftarel, prachel, the buttons and the flowers. The Mesafkalon, so the Gemara isn't sure. Does it go mishukodim on the cups as agbo gvim mishukodim? Or the mishukodim a kaftarel prochel, that mishukodim kaftarel prochel, that the kaftarim prochim were mishukodim ulekach. So therefore, the Rambam, not wanting to get into this suffix, so he says both of them were made. The misveika, because we're not sure what the pasuk means. Avedinon kulhu mishukodim. We make them all in the way of shkedim. Because there's nothing to be lost to make sha'afim yasu mishukodim. Even if you make, if the meaning of the pasuk is other than we make it, and you make it mishukodim, vein tzorich li is mishukodim, maybe it doesn't have to be mishukodim. So it's not a big problem. There's no loss. So therefore, if you don't know how to do it, if you're going to make everything mishukodim, there's no loss. But if you're going to let go and some you're not going to make mishukodim, if it was necessary to have mishukodim, so then there is a problem. Then it's not doing. There's a kapeda. The Eibishter says make it Mishukodim, and you didn't make it Mishukodim. So because we don't know exactly what the Eibishter wants us, the Pasuk wants us to make Mishukodim, we're going to make both things Mishukodim. That's the Rikurkus that the Kesef Mishnah brings down, why the Rambam says that it's old made Mishukodim. But that would be okay if we only said that the middle stem, which we have a question what it means, that we made them both Mishukodim. That would be okay. The problem is the Rambam says everything is made Mishukodim, also the ones of the branches. By the branches, there is no doubt. Over there, it only says the Gvim are made Mishukodim. So therefore, the Mishnah Lemelech asks, frag der Mishnah Lemelech, the Mishnah Melech asked, there's Sofik in Braise. The doubt in the Braise is doch nor bekrod u v'menoir arbog v'mishukodim kafterel prochel. In this passage that it says that there were 4 cups mishukodim, the buttons and the flowers. The Mairi beguf shel menorah. That was talking about the body of the menorah. Aber benegei yad the kafterim u'prochim b'sheishes hakonim. But as it relates to the buttons and the flowers in the 6 branches, there's no question. They weren't, the Pasuk doesn't say at all. Then it says kafter v'ferach. Over there's no doubt in those that only the Gevim are mishukodim. Loy misafkele. Over there, we don't have a doubt ibo inon mishukodim if we need mishukodim. But kivon the hifsik midiverter, since the Torah doesn't say in the Pasuk when it talks about the menorah by the branches, it doesn't say shleisha gevim mishukodim kafter v'ferach bekona echad. It interrupts with the words bekona after mishukodim. So it's loy misafkalei. The Gemara doesn't have any doubt whether we require mishukodim by the kaftorim. No, kivon the hifsik midiverter, since the Torah interrupts with the words bakone ha'echad shloisha gevim mishukodim. It says bakone ha'echad bein mishukodim lekafter v'ferach. It says shloisha gevim mishukodim, and then it says bakone ha'echad, and then it says kafter v'ferach. If you're not going to say so, but you're going to say that the kafter v'ferach needs to be mishkodim as well, the pasuk would say shloisha gevim bekone ha'echad, that there were 3 cup bekone ha'echad mishkodim kafter v'ferach, then it would go on the kafter v'ferach. Not the shloisha gevim mishukodim and then bekona echad and then kafter v'ferach. Pavazok the Rambam hakot mishukodim. Why does the Rambam says everything mishukodim, which includes also the branches? Frag the Mishnah Lamelach. The question of the Gemara is only about the stem of the menorah. Over there, the pasuk can be read both ways. But here, after the words mishukodim gevim mishukodim, it says bekona echad, which clearly makes this separation that the gevim are mishukodim. And later on it was kafter b'ferach. So why does the Rambam say the kafter b'ferach? Alkol mishkodim, everything, even from the branch mishkodim. It remains something we need to look into. That's the question of the Mishnah Lamelach. And the Rebbe is going to bring now different answers. The Rebbe comes up with a whole different idea that it's not even a question, that it's not based on the Gemara, not based on this. The Rebbe learns differently and explains it beautifully. But first, the Rebbe also challenges or questions the answers of some of the other Mefarshim. So first, we have the answer of the Mabit, in Ois base. The Mabit, he comes up with a whole nother issue. He says that the Rambam's decision was not based on the question of the Gemara, but the Rambam's decision is based upon, he says, we know that by the branches it says only the Gevim need to be made out of Meshukodim, in a way of Meshukodim, and not the Kaftoim Mufrachim. And we know actually by the pasuk, by the menorah itself, over there we also don't really have a suffix. We know because there's an esnachta, there's a stop. So we know that Mishukodim goes on the kafterel pracha because it says arbo givim, esnachta stop. Then it says Mishukodim kafterel pracha. So over there the pasuk says the kaftorim and the prachim need to be uh, made in a way of Mishukodim. So by the branches, we know it's the Gavim that need to be made Mishukodim. By the stem of the menorah, we know the Kaftorim of the Prachim need to be Mishukodim. And the question is, says the Mabit, what's the difference? Why over here this way and over there that way? And because of this problem, why would it be different from one? Why would the branches of the menorah be made differently? The cups and the kaftorim and from the gufa menorah, because of this problem, the Rambam decides that they all have to be done the same way, and therefore everything is done in a way of mishukodim. But the Rebbe argues that's not a very strong answer. Just because the Torah instructs by the branches that they should be the Gevim Mishukodim, why would we have to say that because the Gufa Manoira, the Gevim are the Kaftorim Proch Mishukodim also in the same way the other way around? Why just because the Kaftorim and the Prochim are Mishukodim by the branch of Manoira, that's why it doesn't, it's not as strong. But besides the fact the Rebbe says that in many of the Mefarshim we see that the issue is about the branch of the menorah, and it's not about the menorah, stem of the menorah, not about the branch of the menorah. So the Rebbe doesn't accept the answer of the Mabit. The Mabit base, let's look inside. The Mabit fragt die Shaila, he asked the question, he answers based on the interpretation of the Toisus. In dem Tam, was Meshukodim ein loy hechra. Taisus explained why do Meshukodim not have a decision which way to read it. As their suffix is, the reason there is a question is Meshum the Iko Asnachto begivim. Because by Givim there is an Asnachto. The Torah says Arbo Givim, stop. Uva Menoid Arbo Givim, stop. Umashmoi, so since there's a stop, so it appears Meshukodim Kafterel Bracha, that the Kafterel Bracha should be Meshukodim. But Taisa says, Ukra Achrina Muchrach Muchachod Meshukodim Loi Koi Elagvim. But another pasuk in the branches of the menorah, it's evident that Meshukodim does not apply only on the Gevim, because over here it says very clearly that Shloisha Gevim Mishukodim. And then it says Bakona Echad, so we see it's clearly that the Gevim are Mishukodim. Tiksiv, Shloisha Gevim Mishukodim. That's the way it says. That is only the Gevim Mishukodim. Ulahachi Ein Lo Hechra. So therefore, even though there's an Asnachta, but because we find by the Menorah that the Gevim were Mishukodim, maybe, therefore, there's no decision for sure that Meshukodim by the Gufa Menorah is a stop, and then Kaftero Prochel, does haste. As the Ein Lo Hechra, so why is there no decision in the meaning of by the Menorah, Arbo Gvi Meshukodim Kaftero Prochel, is Misad der Stira zwischen the zwei Psukim because of the contradiction of these two verses. Von dem Posik wegen die Sheishes Hakonim is Muchach. In the verse that talks about the 6 branches, it's evident as Meshukodim loy koi ela Gvim. Over there we see clearly Meshukodim only goes on the Gvim. Und der Posik uva Menorah arbo Gvim. But in the Posik that talks about the branches, in the Menorah, there were 4 cups. Vosika Asnachta begvim, there's an Asnachta, is mashma is mashma and mishukodim kaftarel bracha. Here it's mashma that it's kaftarel bracha. So Umebalda Zoi says the Toisus Abdinon Lekulu the Kanem Nami Mishukodim. That's why we also make this is from the this is the Mabit saying that we're therefore going to make all the branches of the Menorah also Mishukodim. We're going to make them Mishukodim as well. Meaning also the prochim and the button and the kaftorim. The ma'ishno menorah gufa mekane menorah. Why would the menorah itself, the main stem, be different than the branches? That the menorah, they're both made over there. Everything, the kaftorim and the prochim and the gevim are all made out of meshukodim, in a way meshukodim. And why is this different? Ikulu gvim kaftorim uprochim the menorah bo mishukodim. If all the gvim and the kaftorim and the prochim of the menorah itself, the stem bo mishukodim, need to be mishukodim mishum dein hechra, because there is no decision ahechikoyu how to translate it. Hachinami kulu dekanim bo mishukodim. So the same thing is true that also the branches all need mishukodim. Because, so basically, what we're not sure is how to translate the pasuk by the menorah itself, by the stem of the menorah. But because over there, why would the branches be any different? And if there you make them all, the branches, also the kaftorim and the prachim, should be made out of, in a way of mishukot. But the Rebbe says that pirush is l'chayra, but that pirush l'chayra nit verstandig. It's not understood. Loit mabit kumtois, according to the mabit, it turns out as mitzad der svara for maish no menorah gufa miknei ha-menorah. He says because why would there be a different the menorah than the branches? Verta sofik ein lehechre beide psukim. This makes a question that there's no decision also in both verses. He's almost like telling us, just like we're not sure by the Gufa Benoida how to teach it, as the Gemara brings down, the Rebbe brought down Perikei Siloi in Yoima. It seems like he's saying there's also not a decision about the branches of the Benoida. Sagt, he says, as Oid Mevolt Zogun, as Mishukodim de Benoida Loikoi Elo Akevtoreo Uprocheo, that if we would have accepted that the esnachto by the menorah itself is mishukodim, and then we say, gevin, and then we would say esnachto mishukodim kaftereo procheo. If that's the way says the Mabit, then we would have to squeeze and say as oichin posik. That also here too, we would have to say that in our pasuk when it says three gvim mishukodim, which clearly says that only the gvim mishukodim, because it says kona eftachod, and only afterwards says kapter v'ferach. So with this pasuk, so the Mabit says no, that we would also have to say is koyi mishukodim aseifa dekroda kapter v'ferach, since it goes in kapter v'ferach. His point, the Mabit's point, is it has to be similar to the menorah. If at the menorah there would be a decision that kaftereo, procheo are the only thing that are mishukodim, kaftereo, procheo, then even though in this pasuk it seems clearly that it means the gevim mishukodim would have to squeeze and say the kaftereo, procheo are the ones that are mishukodim. Forget about the fact that it says over there, we would still have to squeeze that way in. So to the Mabit, it seems like the major point is that we have to equate the two. The menorah and the branches have to be the same. If that's the way the menorah was made, that's the way the branches were made. And since though the menorah, we don't know itself, the stem, which way it was made. Therefore, the branches need to be made the same way. That's the Mabit's position. Underfar, and therefore, that's the Mabit says. Leuten biura kesef mishnah mimaharik, from the biura kesef mishnah from Mari Kurkus that he explained. As misveka avdino kulu mishukoti, because we're not sure by the stem of them that are making all mishukotim. Also by the branches, you make it all mishukotim. Say in the menorah atzmon, say in the sheish sakonim, both in the menorah itself and in the six branches. The Balder suffix is in Beit Psukim now. The suffix is in both verses because there cannot be a change. And since if that's the way that we do it by the menorah, we also have a doubt in the pasuk. Even though over here there's the word bakona in the middle, it's still we have to squeeze and say maybe it means the kaftorim mufrachim, and therefore we make everything meshukot. But the Rebbe doesn't accept that. This is very difficult to say so. Weil Aleph, the idea itself that because the menorah itself is made one way, we have to say the other way we have to say the same way by the branches, even though the pasuk says differently. Very difficult to accept that. Weil wie passt zu sagen, how is it fit to say? As misad, there's svore from Hulu. Why different does it make? So men sich doichig sein, we should squeeze, mafkia sein, then posik, we should go ahead and squeeze, and take out the posik shloishu gvim goyim pshute, to take it out in the simple meaning. Why should we take it out in the simple meaning? Just because it doesn't fit the way it was, the guf of the neder was done. So that's number one. But the Rebbe says in many other places we see clearly the issue is not about the posuk that talks about the branches. The only question is the pasuk that talks about the stem of the menorah. V'kama mekoymis in many places in the Yerushalmi, in the Brais of Melachas HaMishkon, in the Mechilta v'oid steht beferish. Over there it says very clearly, as their suffix is in zweiten pasuk. The question is in the second pasuk, where it says b'menorah agvor arbog v'mishukotim geimer, not in the first pasuk. So is l'cheira daf man lernen. So l'cheira we have to learn. As in ersten pasuk in the first verse, loy shogvim mishukodim goimer is talking suffix. There is really no question over here. As mishukodim but sitzich blois oif di gvim. That mishukodim is only talking about the cups. That's not a question. That's in the first pasuk when it talks about the branches. We're talking about the branches, the Gevim or Mishukodim, by Kona Echad, and there was Kaftorim Mufro. Bibalt is though that have from Bakona Echad because there's an interruption. Gevim Mishukodim stop by Kona Echad. Far the Verter Kafter Beferach before the words Kafter Beferach. With the deal Kalosh in Toysves, you can even see Toysves says this. The exact language. Toysves says Ukro Achrino. When Tosfos discusses the problem that it says in another pasuk that the Gevim or Meshukodim, and therefore we have a problem how to tie this pasuk by the Gufa Menorah. Tosfos uses the lotion that in the other pasuk is Mukha Milsa. Ukrachron Mukha, that it's evident that it's has to be like the Meshukodim Lekoya Lagvim. So he says very clearly that in the first pasuk, when it talks about the branches, of course over there only the Gevim are Meshukodim. Uzoknit v'frier mashmo, he doesn't say like when he talks about the Asnachta is mashmo that it goes on the Kaftorim. But over here it says Mukha, because there's no other way. So, we know that this pasuk means by the branches of the menorah means very clearly arbo gvim, shloisha gvim, Meshukodim, only the Gvim was Meshukodim. So what is Tosfos saying? The question is by the Gufa Benoida. Their suffix, Oidlech Tosfos, the suffix also according to Tosfos, which doesn't just say within the words itself, but says brings in the posuk of the Menoida, is blois in zweiten posuk. The suffix is only in this posuk when it talks about the Menoida itself. The Heine, si mishukodim batzitzich zu kaftoir, does mitzukodim go on the kaftoir, VC's mashma derfun as it appears from the fact was ikas nachta begvim. There is a stop by gvim, so the pastus is mishukodim kaftoir procheo. Nit wie bei Sheishes Hakonim was the Gvim Zainen Meshukodim, and then that would be different than by the 6 branches over there. The cups were Meshukodim, but here the branches are gonna the Kaftonim Prach will be Meshukodim. Other Mizol Zogun, or we should say as Meshukodim Batzitzich zu the Gvim. The Takedin Meshukodim is referencing the cups, even though there's an asnachta. Vazoi learned enough from Friedrich Pasik, because this is what we see in the previous Pasik, that the Gevim were the ones Meshukodim. Which is Mukha, the Meshukodim, Lukoya Lagvim, where it's evidence going on the Gevim. So the question is only about the stem of the menorah. But there is no question about the branches of the menorah. So we have the question, why does the Rambam say that all of the kaftorim and the prochim, also from the branches of the menorah, were made meshukodim? So we have the question back to its place. Parvos sollen die kaftorim und prochim von the sheishes hakonim sein meshukodim? Why should the buttons and the flowers of the 6 branches be meshukodim? Why? There's no even a question over there, it would seem. That's not part of the question, only the material itself. Other Mefarshim, the Rebbe says now, finally, another possible answer that Mefarshim want to answer. Yes, there's not a question about the branches. The only question is on the guf of the menorah. But since we already see, we should make them all the same. That's why the Rambam says they're all made. And the Rebbe says it's not a good svara, not a good reason enough. The Rebbe says, Gimel, andere Mefarshim sagen, other Mefarshim say, as afal pi as der posik is taken nor, as the suffix is taken nor posik aveis. It's true that the question is only in the second posik now, as we read down before. But still, since there is an idea to compare and to tie b'torei kocha, we want a proof for Tosfos does prove the meaning of the pasuk by the menorah itself from the way it was done with the branches. He wants to compare them. B'torei kocha, the zweiten pasuk, mit den ersten, with the first of Amistavra Shiyushovim, they should be equal. So therefore, we have a question on the second pasuk. Should we go only by the asnachta, or maybe we should squeeze and say gvim meshukodim, that the gvim are meshukodim? Therefore, learn the Rambam. That's why the Rambam is of the view as kishem v'menach takoil meshukodim by gufa shel menorah. Just like we make everything meshukodim by the menorah itself, because because the Gemara says we can't decide what the pshat of meshukodim is by the gufa menorah. Azoy machtman akol meshukodim by the sheishes hakanim. So we make it all in a way of meshukodim by the 6 branches. After the pasuk lo yichiyav kain kach, even the pasuk did not obligate. So, because the Torah clearly says gevim shloshim meshukodim kidei lashveisu, because in order to make them the same, There's no problem to add to make it also Mishakodim. That doesn't bother us. But the Rebbe says, this answer requires great understanding. See, is then this is then such a kind of an idea. We want to make them same. Maspik zu mechadish ein adin. Is this sufficient to come up with a law as a kol mishkodim? They're all made mishkodim. Euch dort wo der Posik kufel euch kach. Posik itself is not obligated, and we're saying no, we're going to make it equal. We're going to make it all. Ubefrat as the Rambam sagt nicht dabei wie jeder. Sometimes when the Rambam comes up with a chiddush, says it seems to me, it doesn't say that here. Asach chiddush b'halocha mus l'chedo haben amoker. Such a novelty in halacha should have a source. So there needs to be a better answer, and the Rebbe is going to find the conclusion, asking several other questions. How could it even be a question? In the menorah was there all the years. Why couldn't we see how they were made? How did this develop? And the Rebbe goes through, and how could the pasuk write things that are not decided, the questionable ein lamechra? But the Rebbe learns that it's not even a question from the beginning. It was all made mishukodim. The question is just in the meaning. How do we learn the pasuk, but not on the fact? And the Rebbe says there's an obligation to make it all mishukodim. It's only a question in the Gemara how to translate. So even though by us it says very clearly that it's mishukodim is the gevim, that doesn't negate the fact that everything needs to be made mishukodim, as the Rebbe will continue to explain in Eis Dalet and on. Eis Dalet. Wird man das verstehen behagdim habiur in der Breise Hanal. So we'll understand it by first explaining the explanation, the above mentioned Breise, that Tanya Isi ben Yehuda learned that there were 5 psukim that have no decision. As Mishukodim is Ein Lo Hechra. That Mishukodim is not have a decided which way to read it. L'cheire would seem something a very difficult concept. Wie kann man bechlal sagen, as Teure sagt adin in an Eifen, that Teure tells us a halacha in such a way, was ein lo hechra, which has no decision how to say it, as over in Asofik, that there becomes a doubt, und man soll nicht wissen, wie zu mekayim sein the mitzvah. We don't know how to fulfill the mitzvah. We have a mitzvah to do. We don't know how to do it because we don't know how to read the pasuk. We don't know it's the Gevim have to be Mishukodim or the Kaftorim Uprochim. And the Rebbe says it's different because here it actually is a din, how to make the Gevim and the Prochim. Do we make them Mishukodim or not? As opposed to just an interpretation. The other 4 cases that Isi ben Yehuda talks about, Bishleima by the andere 4 mikrois. Over there, the other 4 psukim. Seis, Mochor, Or, V'kom. These are all psukim that we can read in both ways. Over there, it's merely is das Negeya nor zu wissen, wie zu teitschen a posik. That is only important to know how to translate a verse. Aber by Mishukodim, but when we talk about Mishukodim, this is as doch hatzivu boifen asiyis ha-menorah. That's talking about a command, how we should make the menorah. So how could the Eibishter give you a command in a way that it's not clear? Muzmen l'chayre zog. So we need to seemingly say, as ein le hechre, when we say there is no decision, meint nit as milachatchila ubeetzem ha-teure nit machriya gewen. It doesn't mean that to begin with, and in essence, Torah did not make a decision here. Sicher hat Torah gehat, gesagt, wie zu machen die Menorah auf einer bestimmten Weise. For sure, the Torah told us to make the menorah in a certain way. Und azoi hat es Moshe Rabbeinu gemacht bepoil, and that's the way Moshe Rabbeinu made it in actuality. Und der Sofik ein loy hechre, and this question that has no decision is neulad geworden erst in a spätertiken Zman. This came about in a later time that we didn't know how to teach. Moshe Rabbeinu knew how to make the Eibshter told him how to make the menorah. But later on, there became a doubt in the pasuk when ein lahecha. Stelz of the shaila. So the question is, wie bald sie ständig gewesen am menorah in Mishkan und Mikdash, since there was always a menorah in the Mishkan and the Mikdash, when wie azoi is nolad geworden der Sofik. When and how was this question created? It was very clear at one point what we need to do. Moshe Rabbeinu did it one way, the way the Eibshter told him. So why did it all of a sudden became a question? L'chayre, both men gekend zogen. So the Rebbe said, maybe we can say, as der Sofik is geworden dem Zman from Golus Bavel, that this question, the doubt became at the time of the Bavel exile, like we find in another case. Al derech with the Gemara zogt dort lifnei zeh. The Gemara says there, before this Isi ben Yehuda case, the Gemara says, "B'negeya to Amatraxin." There was an Amatraxin. Was one Amma dividing between the Kodesh Hakadoshim and the Kodesh, and the question was that Amma itself, was it part of the Kodesh, or it was part of the Kodesh Hakadoshim, or it was part of the other side? So the Gemara says there, as Ersh b'Migdosh Sheni was only at the time of the second base of Migdosh, is istapkuhu Rabbanon b'Gdushosei. Then the Rabbanon were in doubt the sanctity of that Amo, of the Amotraxin, that separated the two sections. Ikilifnim, ikilachutz. Is it like the inside, like the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or like the outside? Und der Sofik is mitzad der Shaila, and the reason why they weren't sure is because the question was vitzu taichen aposik udvir goimer, which talks about the separation alofona v'ila achra. We didn't know is it goes on ahead or what it says in the back. So therefore, that question became about. So maybe we can say that over here became a question between the first Beis Hamikdash and the second Beis Hamikdash. They had to make again the menorah, and they weren't sure how to make the menorah. So, besides the fact that this is difficult. Zwischen die welche haben Eile gewähnt mit Ezra, together with those that came up with Ezra, seien doch gewähnt, the Rabbim HaKohanim Goimer Haskenim Asheros Bais Harishan. The Pasuk says many of them witnessed the elders that saw the first Beis Hamikdash. So this wasn't people that didn't see what it was. So they knew how it was done by the first Beis Hamikdash. So why wouldn't they know the way the menorah was structured? So first off, the Rebbe said, why wouldn't they know? But even if we'll say that they did it one way in the first Beis Hamikdash, came to the second Beis Hamikdash, they had to change it because they didn't know how to make it. They didn't know how to explain the pasuk. So that means that the first menorah in the first Beis Hamikdash was made in one way, and the second menorah was made differently because they didn't know how to teach the pasuk. They didn't know how to. The first Beis Hamikdash, the Eibshter told the Mishkan, told Moshe Rabbeinu, so they knew from then, and they knew how to do it in the first Beis Hamikdash. In the second Beis Hamikdash, they didn't know because of the Golus. So it means that they had to do it differently. But we don't find anywhere the Rebbe says that there should be a difference in the menorah between the first and the second Beis Hamikdash. Is oid ve'ikar, the problem is saying it this way, lo yishtamed b'shomokim leimar, we don't find anywhere to say, as is given ashinui b'tzurus ha-menorah, that there was a change in the shape of the menorah zwischen Bayis Rishon or Bayis Sheni, between the first base of English and the second base of English. As Davke Bayis Sheni is given Hakol Mishukodim, that only the Bayis Sheni, we didn't know, was everything Mishukodim. So when did this? We had to say that Moshe Rabbeinu knew how to build it. The Eibishter told him how to do it. But then you're going to say there's a question developed later. So when did the question happen? How did it take place? Between the first base of English and the second base of English, you can't say. First of all, people were there from the first base of English, many people. And second of all, that would mean there's a change. The first base of English was done one way. Second base of English, when they didn't know, they had to make everything Mishukodim. Euch kann man nicht sagen, also can't say, as der Sofik is nailed geworden erst by Isi ben Yehuda, that this question became by Isi ben Yehuda in his time. They made it the way they made it, but here he had the question how it was made. We can't say that. Weil neus of lezeh as yesh makom lach kertzi bizmane zayin di katana, because you have to still figure out whether he was a Tana. They already forgot how the menorah was sitting. So this became a question already by Isi ben Yehuda. That's also problematic. Once is euch nicht gewähnt, the Möglichkeit levarer halacha, they couldn't figure it out. Is oid v'ikar. We can't say that this question became by Isi ben Yehuda. First of all, the Rebbe says, why wouldn't Isi ben Yehuda know, or why couldn't he find out the way it was made? But another question, wieso hat doch kein Ort nicht zu Masbe sein dem Psak Rambam HaKol Mishukodim by the Menorahs Beis Hamikdash? So how could the Rambam say that how was it made by the Menorahs Beis Hamikdash? Often you say that Maimer ein lehechrad on the basis of the Maimer that on the saying there's no decision. This was Isi ben Yehuda's question. He didn't know, but it was done one way. Well, how could the Rambam just say because Isi ben Yehuda didn't know? That's why that's the way they made it in the Beis Hamikdash. The Beis Hamikdash didn't know when they made it that way. This was only a question that came up by Isi ben Yehuda. Asofik was Alpian now is a Neilud geworden. This was created after the Churban. But here the Rambam is saying that because of Isi ben Yehuda, the legitimacy of his question is not only his. That is a question how they actually built it. And because they weren't sure, they built it in a way that everything was Mishukodim. But how could it be that they didn't know how to do it? It was done one way. The Eibishter told Moshe Rabbeinu how to do it. It was not a question. So how and when did this question come up that we do it both ways? And the Rebbe is going to say that actually this tells us that this was not really a question in actuality. But first, the Rebbe is going to make a distinction. There's a lot of things that we do today that we don't know. Why is it a question? How come we have a question about it? And why don't we look the way they did it in the past? And there's various answers, but the Rebbe says in this case, it doesn't really, all the answers don't fit. Because this was something that was there for many years, and we don't understand how there can be a doubt how the menorah was. Was it made Gvim Mushukodim, or they both, the Kaftorim and the Prochim, how they were made? Something which was a fact, and they could have found this out. The Rebbe doesn't say. The other explanation that we answer elsewhere would not apply in this case. Let's look inside. Hey, since you do the Shakla Vitari Benegeya, the mitzvahs, it's known, there's a debate about the mitzvahs, that was observed all the time, is Man Moshe Rabbeinu, starting from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. Ve'azoi seinen in sei Nele geworden Sveikes und Pluktes bei von Kiyomon. How with their created doubts and disagreements, how did you fulfill them? How could you have doubts how we fulfilled mitzvahs if you've been doing the mitzvahs of Moshe Rabbeinu? Why don't we know what it was done in the past? And from the very public examples, Pluktas Rashi Rabbeinu Tam B'Tfilin. There's a disagreement of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam B'Tfilin how we set up the parshias in the boxes of the tefillin. The Chayra, how could there be an argument? You were able to, you should have easily found out. They should have looked the tefillin of their fathers. To see if they're organized according to Rashi's opinion or the other opinion, Rashi or Rabbeinu Tam's. How could they start arguing about something which was done all the time? Is Yadua the beer? So over there we explain as the plukta hat sich angegeben nit bisman Rashi der Rabbeinu Tam. It wasn't started in the time of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. They came up with this argument. Nor as eine gewende zwei Shittas euch der Shlifneim. The two views were in the generations that preceded them. Behesse mit die Shita is einen euch dit vielen gewend bepeulen zu erfahren. And fitting with the different views, there was taka two tefillahs. In two ways, some went like the Rashi and some went like the Tam. It goes back all the ways to the beginning. So that is an answer by tefillin. Okay. The shaila, but in our case, bleibt aber wie bald a iden legen tefillin. Mizman Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, so we're putting on to Moshe Rabbeinu. Hodoch l'chayre gedat must in them sein a mesoida. There needed to be a tradition that went from a father to a son. Chulu zint deide shel Moshe. So this goes all the way back to Moshe. Okay, so you're saying it didn't start now, started way, way before. But how did it even start at that earlier stage? How did they start that machlokes then? In other places, there's answers that even Moshe Rabbeinu did it one way, could be Yeshua disagreed with him. And even though Moshe Rabbeinu, but there's one thing Moshe Rabbeinu teaching the Torah, other thing is that Yeshua needed to do it the way he understood Torah. Whatever the answer, the Rebbe doesn't go into it over here. But we see there's problems. Al derech zeh is the shaila b'pluktas b'shama b'sila by tzitzis. There's also machlokes between b'sham b'sila with regard to tzitzis. Kama chutin hu noisin. How many strands, how many strings do you put in the tzitzis? So this is a very factual machlokes. How many strands you put in the tzitzis? According to Beis Hillel, you put 4 strands and you double it so you get 8. According to Beis Shammai, you put in 3 strands, when you double, you get 6. So the question is, so what was the tradition? According to that tradition, they observed the mitzvah of tzitzis from the time Moshe Rabbeinu, without interruption. But in other examples. So we have the problems, but there is way to answer that over there. But in those cases is still not as problematic as in our case. The way you're going to explain the Efshoriyus HaSveikis in the Shakal V'Tariyanal, the possibility, how did we get the doubts in those debates about Bishamai and Bishilal or about the Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, in the Shakal Vetes nit verenter in the Shaila beniden the Dam by Menoida. This will not answer our question by the Menoida. The Menoida shel Moshe, the Menoida of Moshe was given in Tavnis Hasharata Morabahor. That became the image that the Eibishter showed Moshe in the mountain. This was shown by the Eibishter how to make it. Is doch given Kayim b'meshach hunderte Yorim from Bayis Rishon. That was in existence for hundreds of years in the first Beis Hamikdash. Ba'ofen as mod gizen und gewusst b'diuk the tzuras hamanoira. It was in a way that you knew, you saw, and you knew exactly the shape of the menorah. Wie gesagt früher, I said earlier, is leishtamed b'shum mokum loymar, that we don't find it anywhere to say, as in them is geworden a sofik, I feel in his man Golus bubble, that it became all of a sudden a doubt, the time of exile of bubble, that all of a sudden we don't know how to make the menorah. So, what's going on? How could there be a question by the menorah? And the Rebbe says there's not a question about the menorah itself. This is actually the reason. Because we have such a strong problem. We don't understand how the Torah would give a command which is not exact. And we also don't understand how could we not know how it was done in the past, that we have we have a doubt. That means that there is no doubt and that the Torah is not ambiguous how the Torah told it to us. It's only another issue, the suffix. We know exactly how it was supposed to be done. And that's the source of the Rambam. Let's look inside. This is actually the reasoning. The two above questions that we say in this, that there's no decision about how to teach Meshukodim. Aleph, we asked, how could it fit? How does it fit that the command of Hashem and the Menorah should express so davke ba'ofen as ol machen asofik in a way that it makes a doubt? That we should how to do in the lach l'maisa. The Eibshter gives a command and he leaves it a doubtful how you do it. Beis, we also don't understand why would they even have a doubt. But you can't mevaris in the sofik from the menorah shos Moshe. They could have verified the question by the menorah that Moshe Rabbeinu made. Seine machriach zu sagen. So this all forces us to say, as lepoyel is by menorahs Moshe given, that in actuality by the Moshe's menorah was hakol mishukodim. Everything was made in the way of mishukodim. Nit machmas sveikol l'chumra. Not because we didn't know how to translate the posik and we went stringent and we made it that way. Nor mitzat adin va'alocha. Because the din va'alocha, that's the way it was done. As the Rebbe will explain, that was zekeli van vei. We have to make it in the best way. Betamam is by lekama siv zayin, for the reason explained later on in siv zayin. Und der ein loy hechre meint nit. When it says there's no decision, does not mean asofik bedin, that there's a question what the din is. Welche Teilen von der Menorah seine Meshukodim, we don't know which parts of the Menorah were actually Meshukodim. Nor blois bepirush aksuvim. It's only how to interpret the verses. V'davke al pizeh yumtaku, and dafke, based on this interpretation that here also it's not halacha, it fits in with all the other four, which are just merely translating the pasuk, are not talking about sivuyim. This would also sweeten that this is bunched up. Shazohu b'diuk in the andere vier mikrois can al sivdal. This is similar, exactly like in the other four psukim, which also it's not a halachic question what to do, because according to the Rebbe's interpretation, it's only a question how to learn the psukim. So it's exactly over there. The pasuk can be typed in two ways, not that there makes a difference in halacha. See them words over here. The question is the word meshugodim get lamaylo lamata? Does it go above or below? Aber the menorah bepoil is given hakol meshugodim. It was all made meshugodim. Kuntois. So it turns out in that case, as the psaka Rambam hakol meshugodim is not a titzof and a chumra in the sofik. It's not the result of a chumra in the sofik. Ein lahechra. We don't know. Like the Rikurkus says, and the Mabit wants to say, or other, was his Nerlud Givorim Bisman Min Hazmanim, that was created, that came about, was born in a certain time. All of a sudden it became a question. Nora inya shel halacha kavua. This is a set halacha. We know all the time that this was it. It's not based on a on a doubt. Not in the Gemara of Itzila, as the Mefarshim want to say. Und der Mocker von dem Psak is von dem Ein Lo Hechra. What is the source? Because the Torah, the Gemara says that these psukim have no decision, was is machrich zu sagen, then we must say, how would the Torah say something which doesn't have a decision? That itself tells us, as a kol mishukodim canal, that everything was done mishukodim. Because the Torah wouldn't tell us something which is not clear. So what's the source of the halacha is not because we're doing lechumra because ein lehachra, is because the Torah gave it in a way of ein lehachra. So that means that it's done both. Can't be. Otherwise, the Torah wouldn't give an ein lehachra. And then we extend it also to the Knei HaMenorah. Let's look inside Zion. Das boring them that Inyan for Meshukodim is not a din in Tzuras HaMenorah. Meshukodim is not a halacha that doesn't change the shape of menorah. When we talk about Meshukodim, as oiv the koislei hagvim chulu, that on the walls of the cups darf sein blitis, there needs to be like Meshukodim, there needs to be like almond shape in the tzir for shkei the mandlin, in the shape we say that on the blitis should be almond shaped. Al derech v'di menorah dav haben givim kaftein v'brachim. Similar to the menorah has designs of cups, buttons, and flowers. It also has the givim need to have such kind of blitis. So the givim, the kaftein need to be in a way of shkei. Norvi, the Rambam is medayik v'l'shoinoi. The Rambam says specifically in the language, v'hakoil mishukodim k'meshkedim b'asiyosu. Mishukodim means they are like shkedim, but when you make them like shkedim. It's a din in oifen asiyas ha-menorah. It's a din how to make the menorah. And with the Rambam is mevayer in Pirush HaMishnayis. The Rambam explains in Pirush HaMishnayis. Mishukodim is melocha yedua eitzel umne anechoshes. It's a kind of a work, the way it's known by the craftsmen of copper. They bang with the hammer. Kulei shkedim, they do it shkedim. For myself, this is something public we don't have to explain. Does haste. He says it's a kind of a way, it's not any addition to the shape of the menorah, it's rather a way that the menorah is built, does haste. Since they are to beautify the menorah, that they were only there to beautify them. The Riber HaTorah angesagt, that's why Torah instructed, as soll gemacht werden in an Eifung from Meshukodim, it should make in a way of Meshukodim, that it should be the beauty. Was in a Maise Umanus, it is made Meshukodim, it's a craft, welche bringt arois dem Tziur HaGavir v'chulu b'tachas ha'noi v'yefi. It expresses, it brings out the shape of the Gavia and its total beauty and niceness. It sort of becomes, so it's an elegant, beautiful way. Therefore is move on. So from this we understand that noch dem the Torah is megale as the noi ha-menorah. So after the Torah reveals to what the beauty of the menorah, further the maisu monus, boy from shel mishukodim, it requires the crafts of a monus in a way of mishukodim. Hot kein ort nit zum mechalik sein bei us ha-menorah. There is no real room to distinguish in that menorah between cups, buttons, and flowers. It's something obvious. As alle chelka menorah, all portions of menorah darfen gemacht werden. The maisu monus need to be making through this act of crafts. Und das was the Torah sagt es nur bei ein Prat von der menorah. The fact that the Torah says it just by one detail of the menorah, other by the givim, either the Torah tells it by the givim, which is by the kanim menorah, or by the kaftorim uprochim, which is a possibility by the menorah itself. Is das nicht gemeint lafuki de andere? This is not meant as exclusion, um, exclusively them. Nor adrabe. The posuk is lamed. It comes to teach from them prat. If the andere protim is coming to tell us that this is where everything else was done, as we find in many places. The Torah writes something in one place, and it's not to only in that place. That is there in order to learn from it in the other places. So the Rebbe explains that the it was done. All of them was done because this is a beauty. It's not something new or special. This is just a way of crafting it. And if we have to craft it in a way that it expresses the beauty, it's only logical that everything should be like that. The Rebbe gives in another way. Say it a little differently. About Mishukodim is that inyan for Noyam and since Mishukodim is something which is the beauty of the Noira, is B'derech Memela Chalach Riyuv. So then automatically there is a response, an obligation to make the Menorah Mishukodim. To make the Menorah Mishukodim. If this we're telling you, it adds to the beauty, so there's an automatic obligation to make Mishukodim. Not just for the explicit command by the Menorah, which we're saying is coming to teach for everything else with the Menorah, but for a general obligation. Not only but also the general command for Zakeli Banaveu, that you have to, this is my God, I'll beautify and make every mitzvah beautiful. Do you know should be in beautiful ink? From Kol Chelev Hashem, we learn every fat, the best needs to go to Hashem. If we know now that the beauty is doing it in the way of Mishukodim, everything has to be Mishukodim. The Rambam is Mevayer, as Kol Dover Shul Hashem Akel. Rambam explains everything which is for Hashem Akel HaToiv. Malachas Kama Benidin Dedan, and how much more so in our case. We're talking about the vessel of the Mikdash. It needs to be from the most praiseworthy and the most beautiful and the good. Das heißt, which means in the Mechiyuv from Mushukodim, seine dort zwei Dinim. There's two halachas in Meshukodim. Aleph, the Chiyuv from Meshukodim al Sivui Proti by the Menorah. The obligator has its specific command. That command may be only applying to the Torah's command where the Torah applied it. That's a Sivui Proti by the Menorah. And then you have with the Sivui Bekosuv Befedish, and this Take, when the Torah says specifically, Batzitzich Oder Oivdi Gevim, Oder Oivdi Kaftorim Uprachim. It can either be in the Gevim or the Kaftorim Uprachim, but if it has Ein Lehechra, there's no decision because we are not clear in this command, in this specific command. However, there's a general command. Because we have a general command of beautifying Kol Chelev Hashem. Everything to Hashem needs to be chelev. The fat needs to be the best. Was mitzad them is der chiyuv for mishukodim of tikvim kaftonim u'prochim b'shaveh. For that, it's equal for everything, for the cups, for the buttons, for the prochim equally, because hakol mishukodim needs hakol mishukodim. So the Rebbe learns it in the second way. The Rebbe learns it is that there's two obligations, and when the Rambam says hakol, is because of the general obligation that everything is to be made with Hashem. And the specific is Ein Hanami, we don't know. Or the command was take by one, each one, but we find many times the command is by a prat, and we should learn from it, from everything. But the bottom line is, this is not something which is an addition, it's just a way of making beauty. Once we say a way of making beauty, there's something to learn. Why should we make everything else beautiful? So we can learn from it. What is Ein Lehechra? Like all the other four other things, Ein Lehechra. We don't know how to touch the pasuk, but that's okay. That fits with everything else. There's no halachic difference over here, which we're discussing, especially by the Gevim B'Shukodim. And this answers, so there's nothing to look at the Menorah Moshe Rabbeinu, because of course that was done. Mishukodim, everything, because that's either because of the chiyuv of Zekili Van Veyu, either because we learn from the Torah tells us in one prat, it's done in a beautiful way. Why shouldn't we do the other thing as well? So it turns out the Rebbe learns different than the Kesef Mishnah, than the Mishnah Lemelech, than the Mabit, that it's based on a suffix. It's not because of a suffix. It's because of the halacha. How do we know that? Where do we know that? Where does the Rambam know that? Is because the fact that the Torah wrote in a way of the Ein Lahechra. The Torah wouldn't write something Ein Lahechra. And that means that the Ein Lahechra is only a pirush of the pasuk, but in actuality, we have halacha the way we're supposed to do it. Move on for goes the Indian as Mishukodim Ein Lahechra is blois asofik in pirush aksum. That's why we know, understand why Mishukodim cannot be decided is only a suffix how to explain the psukim. Obviously, it's not a halachically difference. Either way, whether there's a separate chiv of Zakil Van Veyu or there's a binyan av, we learn it from the way one thing was made, is the din from Mishukodim Chalif Ala Protam Neira. The din of Mishukodim rests on all the detail of Menorah. Euch Leuten zweiten Eufen Anal. Also, according to the second way, it turns out that everything best has to be made for Hashem. But what if it's not made the best? Okay, so there's a chiyuv to make it mitzad, but that chiyuv is not ma'akiv. If we learn that it is because there is a mitzvah pratis to make it mishukodim, and because there's a mitzvah mishukodim in one, we learn of the other ones, then if you don't make it mishukodim, you're not fulfilling the mitzvah, even b'diavad. If it's only based, as the Rebbe says in the second interpretation, that it is because Zekili Van Veyu, it turns out if you didn't do it, okay, you didn't do a beautiful mitzvah, but you're still done. Euch Leuten zweit Neufernal, welches is lechoire? Ja, nafkimina la halacha, so it makes a difference la halacha. Whether we teach it, which thing has to be made mishukodim. Tzi mishukodim is adin likuva. Mitzadem tzivu mefurish b'menorah. Whether it's a specific mefurish, others is not achiv. Lechatchila mitzad ze keli van veyu kolchev Hashem. Von deswegen hat man von Meures Moshe nicht gekannt mevarer sein. Dem ein loy hechre bepire shak posuk. But we still couldn't find out because over there they did it because of the Mishur Sadin. How would you know if they did everything Mishukodim? You don't know if they did Mishukodim because of Shur Sadin, because Zekeli Van Veyu, or they did it because there was a mitzvah for in the pasuk. So therefore you couldn't bring a proof from the way the menorah was made. So we could not figure out the Ein Lehechre B'Firish HaPasuk. According to the second, knowing how to touch the pasuk makes a difference where the obligation is. Because we don't know which ones are mishukodim because the Torah is the menorah, so derech meile verantwortet the kush of Mishnah Lemelech. And so this automatically answers the question of Mishnah Melech, because the Rambam sagt hakol mishukodim. So euch v'negei the sheishes hakanim, also v'negei to the 6 branches. Chosh bazeh is talking suffix. There's no suffix. But the time to sagen as hakol mishukodim, because the reason we say everything mishukodim is not mitzadem suffix. It's not because of a suffix. The pasuk, we know what the pasuk is. Nor val der geder mishukodim is the toich na'inyan v'chiv v'akol. The definition of Mishukodim content is an idea. It's everything. It obligates it. Tzadzekeli van veyu. Or we learn it out. If alle protam neiru b'meila is a schal sayev dem koranem mitzoi, it applies to the middle one. Musayev the sheishes hakonim, and also the 6 konim. As alle muss sein van veyu davke, They always be beautiful. From the best, the most praiseworthy, most beautiful, the good. This is Sichos, Shabbos Parshas Matos Umasei, Tovshin Mem Beis.
Okay, I'm gonna go now.